There are people in this world who give everything they have and then give a little more. People who sign their names on documents that said, in plain language, that they were willing to die for strangers. Who slept in mud and rain and fear so that other people could sleep in warm beds without knowing what fear of that kind even felt like. These are not abstract people. They are not symbols or statues or names on a wall, though they deserve all of those things. They are human beings with muddy boots and old jackets and wives they love and medical bills they cannot pay. And sometimes the world forgets them. Not maliciously, most of the time. Just through the casual, grinding indifference of a society that moves fast and values what is new and shiny and loud, and does not always pause to consider what was sacrificed so that the fast and the shiny and the loud could exist at all. Today I want to tell you the story of Arthur Calloway, 80 years old, decorated combat veteran, husband of 50 years, a man who asked for very little and gave almost everything. And the story of what happened on a Tuesday morning in November when he walked into a bank wearing a faded green jacket and a single medal, and what happened in that same bank the following morning. I want to tell it slowly because it deserves that, because Arthur deserves that. Let me start with Martha. Martha Calloway had been Arthur's wife since 1974, which means she had been his wife for longer than most people who will hear this story have been alive. She was the kind of woman who kept a garden even when the soil was poor, who made a meal out of whatever was in the pantry and made it taste like she'd been planning it for days, who laughed at Arthur's jokes even when she'd heard them 100 times, because she understood that the joke was never really the point. The point was the two of them, together, in whatever ordinary moment they happened to be in. She was the architecture of Arthur's daily life, and he knew it, and he had known it for 50 years. And he was not the kind of man who took that knowledge for granted. In the autumn of that year, Martha became ill. The specific diagnosis does not need to be rehearsed here in its medical language. What matters is the word the surgeon used when he sat across from Arthur in that small beige office and explained what needed to happen. The word was necessary, as in, the surgery is necessary, as in, without it, the prognosis is poor, as in, we need to schedule this soon. Arthur asked about cost. The surgeon told him. Arthur sat with the number for a moment, the specific stillness of a man who has faced things that required stillness and has learned how to inhabit it. He thanked the surgeon. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table in the house they had shared for 40 years, and he did the arithmetic on a piece of paper with a pencil, the way he had always done arithmetic. And the arithmetic said what he already knew it would say. The number was beyond what they had. The savings that remained after a lifetime of modest income and honest spending were not enough, not even close. And the gap between what they had and what was needed was not a gap you could close by cutting back on groceries. He would need to borrow the money. Arthur had never borrowed money in his life. This is not a small thing. In 80 years of living, through lean decades and difficult seasons, and the particular financial vulnerabilities of a man who had chosen service over accumulation, he had never once asked a bank for anything. He had managed. He had adapted. He had made things work with what he had, and he had done it without complaint and without asking anyone to cover his shortfall. That was simply how he was built. But this was Martha. He went to the closet and took out the jacket. The old green military jacket, issued decades ago and kept because it was his, and because some things you keep, not for their usefulness, but because they represent something that cannot be replaced. It was faded. The green had softened with age into something quieter, more complicated than the original color. He put it on. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. Then he opened the small wooden box on the dresser, the box Martha had given him years ago, the one she'd found at an antique market and refinished herself, and he took out the Silver Star. The Silver Star is the third highest military decoration awarded by the United States Armed Forces for valor in combat. Arthur had received his in conditions that he did not discuss, and had not discussed for decades. He knew what it represented, and he knew what it had cost, and he did not display it or mention it or use it as evidence of anything. He pinned it to the left breast of the faded green jacket, picked up his hat, and drove to the bank. The bank was the largest branch in the city, the kind of building that announces itself. Glass and steel and the particular architecture of financial institutions that is designed to communicate permanence and authority, the visual language of a place that holds power and wants you to feel that fact when you walk through the doors. Arthur walked through the doors. He told the woman at the front desk that he would like to speak with someone about a personal loan. She looked at his jacket, at his boots, at the mud that had dried on the edges from the garden path that morning, and she directed him to the office at the far end of the lobby. The name on the door said Greg Hadley, branch manager. Let me tell you about Greg. Greg Hadley was 34 years old and had arrived at his position through a combination of genuine financial acumen, aggressive networking, and the particular talent some people have for making their superiors feel confident while making everyone below them feel small. He was good at his job in the narrow sense of the word. The numbers on his branch's performance reports were consistently strong, and in the world Greg inhabited, the numbers were what mattered. Everything else was noise. Greg had grown up in a family of moderate means and had spent his adult life in dedicated flight from any reminder of that fact. His suits were expensive. His office was immaculate. The framed certificates on his wall were arranged with the care of someone who understood that they were not merely credentials, but communications. "This is who I am," they said. "This is how far I have come. Do not mistake me for someone ordinary." He drove a car that was beyond what his salary warranted and lived in an apartment that required a significant portion of his income to maintain, because the appearance of success was, to Greg, functionally indistinguishable from success itself. He did not like people who reminded him of where he came from. He did not like people who did not project the image of prosperity. He had developed, over years in his position, a set of rapid assessments about the people who walked into his office. And those assessments were not generous to the people who arrived in old clothes with modest requests and the apologetic quality of someone who is not accustomed to asking for things. Arthur knocked on the open office door. Greg looked up from his computer screen. He took in the faded jacket, the muddy boots, the silver hair, the slight stoop of a body that had carried heavy things for many years. He did not stand. He gestured without speaking to the chair across from his desk. Arthur sat down. He placed the folder of documents he had prepared on the desk. The pension records, the proof of residence, the medical documentation, the itemized cost estimate from the surgeon's office. He had assembled it carefully the night before, sitting at the kitchen table while Martha slept, organizing everything in a way that he hoped would make the process efficient for whoever he spoke to. He did not want to waste anyone's time. Greg did not look at the folder. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the jacket again, at the medal pinned to it, and something shifted in his expression, not toward respect, but toward a kind of contemptuous amusement. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who has decided, before you've spoken a word, exactly what you are worth, who has already filed you away in a category and is not interested in any information that might complicate that filing? That is what Arthur was sitting across from, though he did not yet know the full dimensions of it. Arthur explained his situation clearly and without embellishment. He told Greg about Martha, about the surgery, about the cost, about the gap between what they had and what was needed. He explained that he was asking for a personal loan, that he had documentation of his pension income, that he believed he was a viable candidate for a modest amount and intended to repay it on a structured schedule. He spoke with the quiet precision of a man who has briefed commanders under difficult conditions and understands the value of being clear and concise. Greg let him finish. Then he picked up one of the documents from the folder, glanced at it for a moment, and set it back down with the particular carelessness of someone communicating that they have not actually read it. He said something about Arthur's boots. He said it in the way of someone who believes that cruelty delivered with a smile is not cruelty, but wit. He gestured toward the faded jacket. He made a remark about the state of it, about whether Arthur had perhaps confused this bank with a charity. And then his eyes traveled to the silver star, the medal that represented a specific act in a specific place that had cost something real. And he said that people who came in looking for handouts sometimes dressed up their begging with props, and that a piece of old metal wasn't a financial credential. Arthur said nothing for a moment. Then he said, with the same quietness, that it was not a prop, and that his wife was dying, and that he was asking for a loan, not a gift, and that he had the documentation to support the request. Greg stood up. He picked up the folder and handed it back to Arthur. He said that this branch was not in the business of speculative lending, by which he meant lending to people who did not appear to have the means to repay, by which he meant lending to people who came in wearing old clothes and medals from wars that nobody remembered. He walked around the desk and opened the office door. And then he did something that crossed a line that should not have been crossed. He raised his voice. He called across the lobby for security. Not quietly, not discreetly, loudly, in the voice of someone who wants an audience, who wants the people in the lobby to stop and look, who wants the humiliation to be witnessed. He said, in terms that left no room for ambiguity, that there was a man in his office who needed to be removed from the premises. The two security guards who came were young, and they were doing their jobs, and Arthur did not blame them. He did not resist. He walked with them, and the walk across the lobby was the longest walk of his dignity, past the customers at the teller windows who had stopped to watch, past the front desk where the woman who had directed him to Greg's office was looking at her hands, past the glass doors that opened automatically and deposited him on the wet sidewalk outside. He fell. Not badly, not in a way that required help. One knee on the concrete, one hand down, and then he gathered himself and stood. The rain was light but persistent. He adjusted the collar of the faded green jacket. He straightened the silver star with 2 fingers, aligning it carefully against the fabric. He stood there for a moment on the wet sidewalk, not moving, just standing in the rain outside the glass doors of the bank. And if you had been watching from the lobby, you would have seen an old man in a faded jacket standing very still. And if you were paying the kind of attention that the situation deserved, you might have noticed something in his posture. Not defeat, not anger, but something more deliberate than either. Then he walked to the payphone on the corner. He dropped a coin in the slot. He dialed a number from memory. The phone rang twice. A voice answered. Arthur said 4 words. He said, "Edward, it's Arthur Calloway." The line was quiet for a moment. Then the voice on the other end said, "Sir, tell me where you are." Arthur told him. He hung up. He walked to a diner across the street from the bank, sat at a table by the window with a cup of coffee he could barely afford, and waited. The next morning arrived the way November mornings do in that city, gray and cool and matter-of-fact, the light thin and even across the empty streets. Greg Hadley arrived at the bank at 8:45, which was earlier than his staff and later than he pretended, and he walked through the lobby with the confidence of a man who believes that yesterday was a good day and today will be better. He had, in fact, received a preliminary indication from the regional office that his year-end performance review would be exceptional. He was expecting, within the quarter, a promotion to a regional management position that he had been pursuing for 2 years. He went to his office. He made coffee. He reviewed the morning's appointment schedule. He was reviewing the second item on the schedule when the sound came. It was the sound of a helicopter. Not the distant, incidental sound of air traffic, but the close, descending, window-rattling sound of a helicopter in the process of landing very nearby. Greg went to his window. In the bank's VIP parking lot, a small, designated area at the side of the building reserved for high-value clients and senior executives, a private helicopter was settling onto the pavement. It was black. It was large. It was the kind of aircraft that communicates, without any additional information, that the people inside it operate in a different category of the world than most. Greg straightened his tie. The helicopter's doors opened. A man stepped out, followed by 3 others. 2 of them carrying document cases, one of them with the bearing and the earpiece of a professional security detail. The man at the center was in his late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that had been made for his body by someone who understood the difference between a suit that fits and a suit that is an instrument. He walked with the unhurried certainty of someone who has not needed to hurry in a very long time, because the world arranges itself around his schedule rather than the other way around. His name was Edward Whitmore. He was the founder and chief executive of Whitmore Financial Group, which was the parent company of the banking chain of which this branch was one of 237 locations across 14 states. His personal net worth was a number with 10 digits before the decimal point. He appeared approximately once a year on the covers of financial publications, and the articles inside those publications used words like visionary and titan and architect. Greg had never met him in person. He had seen photographs. He had watched interviews. He had, in the particular way of ambitious subordinates, studied the man's biography and career arc the way a navigator studies charts. He walked out of his office and across the lobby to meet him. Edward Whitmore walked through the bank's front doors and into the lobby. Greg came forward with his most confident smile, his hand extended, his voice calibrated to the precise frequency of professional warmth, without sycophancy. Edward Whitmore looked through him. Not at him, not past him, through him, in the specific way of someone who has registered a person's presence and simultaneously assessed it as not the relevant presence. He said something to one of the men with the document cases. He walked to the center of the lobby and stopped. Greg's extended hand hung in the air for a moment. He lowered it. The bank doors opened again. Arthur Calloway walked in. Same faded green jacket, same boots, clean now, the mud brushed off with the care of a man who knows the difference between what is worn and what is cared for. Same silver star on his chest, pinned with the same careful alignment. From the far end of the lobby, Greg saw him and felt the particular contempt that settles quickly and deeply in people like Greg. The contempt of someone who has already categorized a situation and resents having to recategorize it. He raised his voice. He called for security. He said, in the carrying tone of someone who believes authority is demonstrated through volume, that this individual had been removed from the premises yesterday and was not welcome on the property and needed to be escorted out immediately. Edward Whitmore turned around. He turned around and he looked at Arthur Calloway coming across the lobby. And what happened to his posture in that moment was something that the tellers and the loan officers and the customers who witnessed it would describe later in different ways, but all with the same essential quality of surprise. Not at what they saw exactly, but at what it meant. Edward Whitmore came to attention, military attention, the full formal version, heels together, spine straight, eyes forward. He raised his right hand to his temple in a salute that was not casual or approximate, but precise. The salute of someone who learned it a specific way under specific conditions and has never forgotten the weight of what it represents. He held it until Arthur was close enough. Then he said, "Sergeant Major Calloway, sir." The lobby was silent. Arthur looked at him. Something moved across his face. Recognition, warmth, the particular quality of seeing someone you have not seen in a very long time, but have thought about with the specific regularity that life-changing events impose on memory. He extended his hand. Edward Whitmore shook it with both of his, the way people shake hands when a handshake is inadequate, but it's what they have. Greg Hadley was standing 15 feet away. Edward Whitmore turned and looked at him. He said, "This man saved my life in the Mekong Delta in 1968. He carried me 4 kilometers through hostile terrain with a bullet in his own shoulder to reach the extraction point when every other option was gone. He is the reason I am standing in this lobby, or anywhere on this earth." He paused. Then he said, "He is also, as of 40 years ago, the silent majority equity holder in this institution. His pension capital was the founding seed investment. The legal structure that holds it has been in place since 1983. His lawyers have the documentation. So does mine." The phrase silent majority equity holder landed in the lobby the way large objects land in still water. Greg heard it. He processed it. He processed it again. The sequence of the previous 36 hours began to rearrange itself in his mind. The old man in the muddy boots, the folder of documents he had not read, the physical removal from the premises, the thing he had said about the metal. The rearrangement was not slow. It was the rapid, sickening rearrangement of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of a catastrophic error. He opened his mouth. He was not sure what he intended to say. He did not get the opportunity to say it. Edward Whitmore looked at him with an expression that was not angry. Anger would have been, in some ways, easier, but simply evaluative. The expression of someone who has received all the information they need and is now making a decision. He said, "I understand you were the manager responsible for Mr. Calloway's treatment here yesterday." Greg said something about protocol, about lending criteria. His voice had lost its carrying quality. It had become the voice of someone who is aware that the ground beneath them is no longer solid. Edward Whitmore said, "Your employment with this organization is terminated, effective immediately. Your licenses will be reviewed by the appropriate regulatory bodies. I will be submitting a personal account of yesterday's events to the relevant professional conduct authorities." He looked at the security guards standing near the lobby entrance, the same guards, or their colleagues, who had escorted Arthur out the previous morning. He said, "Please assist Mr. Hadley with his departure." What happened next took approximately 12 minutes. Greg's access credentials were deactivated. His office was sealed pending review. The keys to the company car were collected at the front desk. He was walked out through the same lobby he had walked through that morning, with the confidence of a man expecting a promotion. And the people who watched him walk out were the same people who had watched Arthur walk out the previous day. And the symmetry of it was not lost on anyone present. Greg Hadley did not find another position in financial services. The professional conduct review was thorough. The account of his conduct, the public humiliation, the physical removal of an elderly, decorated veteran seeking a legitimate loan for his dying wife's medical care, was documented in the review materials in the same clinical language of regulatory filings, which somehow made it worse. He moved back to the city where he grew up, which was the thing he had spent his entire adult life trying to avoid. And he found work that was a great distance from the office with the framed certificates and the expensive suit and the performance reports with strong numbers. Arthur Calloway sat with Edward Whitmore in the lobby of the bank for 2 hours that morning. A loan officer was brought in, a different one, senior, someone who understood the weight of the room and the nature of what was being asked. The paperwork for Martha's surgery was completed before noon. The surgeon was contacted. The procedure was scheduled for the following week. Martha had her surgery. It was successful. She went home to the house they had shared for 40 years, and Arthur brought her tea in the afternoons and sat with her while she recovered. And the garden, which had gone a little untended during the weeks of worry, was brought back to order in the patient, methodical way that Arthur brought most things back to order. He did not tell Martha everything about what had happened at the bank. He told her the loan had been arranged. He told her not to worry. She did not press him on the details because she had been married to him for 50 years and understood the things he chose to carry quietly. I want to say something before I close this story. Power does not always announce itself. It does not always arrive in a helicopter or wear a suit that was made for its body by someone who understood the difference between fit and purpose. Power is sometimes quiet and old and wearing a faded green jacket, and it has a medal on its chest that represents something real, something that was paid for in the most literal possible currency. And it walks into a room with muddy boots and a folder of carefully prepared documents and asks with dignity for what it needs. The Greg Hadleys of the world mistake the appearance of power for power itself. They mistake the expensive suit for the substance it is supposed to represent. They mistake the ability to humiliate someone who does not push back as evidence that the humiliation is deserved. They are wrong about all of it. And usually the error is merely ordinary. A small injustice, a person treated badly, a moment of cruelty that leaves a residue, but no lasting wreckage. But sometimes the person sitting across the desk is Arthur Calloway, and the medal on the faded green jacket is not a prop. And the folder of documents contains more history than the person who refuses to read it could have imagined. And the coin in the payphone on the corner is worth more than everything in the expensive suit's corner office. There are debts in this world that do not expire. Not the financial kind. Those have terms and schedules and maturity dates. I mean the other kind. The kind that accumulates when one person carries another 4 kilometers through hostile terrain with a bullet in their own shoulder. When one person's decision to invest in a dream gives that dream its first breath of possibility. When one person shows up for another in the moments that matter and does not ask for credit or recognition or anything except to be treated with basic human dignity. Those debts do not expire, and sometimes, decades later, in a bank lobby on a Tuesday morning in November, they come due. True power doesn't always arrive by helicopter. Sometimes it walks in through the front door on an old pair of boots, with a single medal pinned to a faded jacket, and it is worth everything.